Hey YouTube, this is Ben Gessel. It's actually 36 degrees today here in Kenmore, Washington. Um, yeah, 36 degrees. Well, 37. It's almost freezing, and it's not even October yet. We went from, I don't know how hot it was, only in late August, really. It must have been, even the beginning of September, it was pushing 90, down to 30, 37 degrees. It's the beginning of October. Very, very beginning of October. Uh, that's quite a shift. It's almost 60-degree difference. So, I mean, I personally am more fond of colder weather, but I have my limits depending on what's actually going on. I mean, it feels cold in the house, and we don't, I don't know. Anyway, so I think there's heating here, but it's just what my landlord does. So, what I wanted to mention though in this video was a bit more regarding this idiocy that involves so many people's supposed um, understanding of historical people and their thoughts on many subjects that we tend to spend more time on, or value more this day and age. You know what I'm talking about. So anything having to do with race, anything having to do with um, women's rights, all that stuff. You know, not too long ago, um, and for quite a long time, quite a long time. I mean, I don't know how long, really. Most of the history of the world, as far as I know, um, people were not treated equally, and that's the way it was. You still had good people that had good, better feelings toward people that weren't white and people that were not men, but you still had good people, but they didn't always say or think about things the way that we tend to think about them these days. Does that mean they were evil? No. Does not mean they're evil. Does that mean they're any less great? No. Doesn't mean that either. Um, Humanity does not, we have not, certainly not even remotely come to the point where we're godlike. That's definitely not the case. Not by any stretch of the imagination. And God, if you guys believe he exists, and I believe he exists, he kind of lets us do what we want to do without. He had the flood long time ago, but other than that, he pretty much lets us. And then there's like Sodom and Gomorrah. He turned Sodom and Gomorrah to salt. Or whatever. There's a little isolated incidents here and there, but he really doesn't intervene too much. He calls prophets to tell people to shape up and stuff. But yeah, he just. I mean, there will come a point in time, of course, when things are different. But for now, it's still like we're kind of letting people do what they want to do, and it's interesting when you have entire cultures or entire societies or entire ways of thinking, like political correctness and all this stuff that it permeates society. And if you're not part of that group, you're kind of you know yeah. And so it's really just it's like sometimes very humorous. It was just not all that long ago that we had people that I think were good men like George Washington and pretty much anybody you can think of it were living before 1960 or so, 1970. I don't know. Take your pick. We'll say 1960, 1965. Anybody living before that time period, and it's just it's so. I can't. I have to laugh because I don't want to think poorly of people that think this way, but it's just it just completely baffles my mind that you have so many people that think so poorly of someone who thought just like everybody else did in their time period. It was the norm to be racist. That was the status quo to be racist by our standards before the civil rights era. It was the status quo to believe that women were were just supposed to be moms and were just supposed to be at home and that sort of thing. That was the status quo before the civil rights era. That was the average. That was what a typical person thought. And within a short period of time, everything's different. At least in the West. The rest of the world's kind of like, ooh, you know. One of the classic examples of this is this weirdness I'm talking about. Is how the West views Islam. Um, I'm not taking sides here, and I think you guys know what side I would take if I was forced to take a side, but I'd rather not take a side here. And it's just Islam has not undergone the hippie era. They didn't go through Vietnam War era thing. They didn't have marches on Washington D.C. They didn't have any of that stuff. They didn't have all the psychologists that started saying stop spanking your kids. None of that stuff. They've continued like they've always continued, and it's only recent times that you've had certain countries like, oh, I don't know, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia. Well, there's secularism is definitely much more influential in these countries, especially maybe Iran, than it used to be. But I keep forgetting Iran, Iran, Iran. I don't. I should know. I should list. Well, anyway, so yeah, I mean, like, and people seem to kind of overlook this fact that the 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 the, the Muslim world never went through these changes, so they still think like they used to think. Now there are people in the West that still think like we think, probably tended to think before the civil rights era. Is that a wrong? Is that a bad thing? Kind of depends on what it is you're talking about regarding that traditional way of thinking. In my opinion, families are great. They're good. They help us have people in the future, which is a good thing. I don't believe in the zero population thing. I have issues with that. Anyway, there are other things that people used to believe in that I still believe in. And there are some things that people seem to be forced to believe in or been indoctrinated to believe that I don't believe. I know I know what's been propaganda. I know what's been kind of, you know, always subtly suggested by the media or by, you know, other things in schools. I know when I've been kind of force fed stuff. I don't have to believe that stuff. I don't have to believe anything. I can believe whatever I want to believe. And you should too. I think it's probably a good idea, though. One of the things the civil rights era did do for us is it's still two things. But let's be honest here. The women's rights thing was probably you got going much earlier in a way. Civil rights really it's the same deal. It was just that we had such a big shift in I think how we thought about black folks and other folks in the 1960s. It was a cultural shift, but the women's rights thing has been was a bit more of a gradual thing from the 1900s on to now. A little bit more of a gradual thing. And Susan B. Anthony, I think, was great, but the modern feminists not so great. So really, when the civil rights era was in its heyday, was really at its height. Feminism at that point, really, roughly speaking, started going in a negative direction, especially after, like, in the 70s, that sort of thing, with Gloria Steinem and stuff. But, yes, I think we should definitely treat all people equally, men and women, people of all different ethnicities and races. Um, I think that though that you just had a major shift in that time period, in how a lot of people thought about people that were black, and you saw on TV that shift in the 70s, especially. Um, yeah, it's interesting to see. You can kind of look about. Well, there's all kinds of things you can look up in this regard, but again, my main point in this video is that there's a lot of people that think they're very intelligent that are not regarding this very subject, which is how people used to think versus how people think now, and all the exceptions and all because there's so many of us, and what is it that causes someone to still think traditionally, to resist, all the stuff we have to deal with these days that we don't agree with. Um, well, which areas of the United States, at least, and Europe, but the United States, say United States, especially in Canada, if we're talking about Anglo America and the West, and let's say we're focusing on that area more than anywhere else, which areas seem like they're the most isolated from uh, centers of population and culture in the United States? Well, obviously, it's rural areas. It's always been rural areas. It's always been farmers and ranchers, wilderness areas. The West, the Mountain West, Alaska. Same thing in Canada. It's all the areas that are isolated up in the north and in the west. Basically, not the area between, oh, what is it? Is it Windsor and Montreal or whatever? It's not the big corridor of people living in Canada between Detroit and, yeah, the closer to the St. Lawrence Seaway mouth. Ottawa, Montreal, something like that. It's not those folks. It's everywhere else in Canada, and then in the United States, it's isolated areas in the South. And Southern culture has always been a little bit unique, and it's rural areas in the Midwest and rural areas in the West, and also even rural areas in the Northeast. It's to some degree. It's a little bit of a mixed bag, I suppose. But you're gonna get people that think more modern way in the big cities in the United States, but only some of them. And um, when it comes to this is an interesting thing too. When it comes to the Afro American culture in the United States, you know, it was I'm sure it was great to be treated better if you're black. But what still confuses some folks, or what still is a little bit of an issue, has to do with I'm not gonna, it's easy to just say the Democratic Party. It's not just that. It has to do with um, wait, hold on. As a if you're a black person, what or black culture, what is it that makes our culture stronger? What is it that helps us to be happier, more successful, and what cultural things, what is helping us basically? And the reason why there's some confusion there is because some folks think that the folks that were advocating for civil rights in the 1670s, they were altruistic, or they were, just just wanting things to be better for African Americans and other people that were not white. The Democratic Party in large measure, but that isn't necessarily the case. They found, especially when it comes to politics. But I've seen other videos, I've watched other stuff, I've experienced enough in life to say that what tends to help one culture is very much like what tends to help any other culture. And so if you have qualities like thriftiness and discipline and a strong work ethic in one culture, it's going to help another culture. It's really, you might have some very subtle differences, of course, with different kinds of people. I understand that, but you're going to have a lot more in common than you have different uh, kinds of things. Why would, it's It's interesting. Let's just take the Black Panthers. I'm not super familiar with these guys, but the Black Panthers were known for being, well, no, 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 we're gonna, you know, uh, they were going a different route than Martin Luther King, basically. The Malcolm X route. So it's getting back to when Samuel Jackson was a young guy, right? Young, angry black man, right? So yeah, I mean, Black Panthers, sure, they were. I mean, they were not like the Black Hebrew Israelites. They were not advocating just random acts of violence, but they were like, they seemed pretty legitimate to me. They were not as well thought of in regards to, I guess you could say, um, a lot of educators. I suppose you could say the nonviolent thing was always taught in school to be the best way of going about doing things, much like Mohandas Gandhi and all that stuff, right? So, it's just that again, like if we're looking at like things like, okay, so what are the jobs like in places where there's lots of black folks? Um, Generally speaking, what's the economy like? What are people doing? How are people living? Are people happier or not quite as happy? Because in order for the African American community to do better, in general, we want to see happier people, right? They're happier. They have more of a sense of purpose, and they're more unified, and they're more thrifty, and they're doing better financially. And they're as a whole, right? You of course, just like everybody else, you always have people in every country, every culture, every people, every ethnicity, every whatever. You always have people that figure it out. They kind of figure out how to be successful, how to be happier. But guess what? The things they figure out doesn't really matter what they look like, what their ethnicity is. They tend to actually have a lot in common regarding what tends to help someone be happier. Things like, being thrifty, knowing, kind of separating needs from wants, and kind of not dealing with your wants until you can. Paying your bills, having peace of mind there, taxes. Although I don't, that's a different deal. Won't get into that right now. And yeah, just having a lot of self-respect, just being confident in yourself, trying to live a good life, a principled life, being friendly and kind to people, and being emotionally reciprocative, not putting up walls, letting people into your life, all these sorts of things. They help you be happier, and they help you be more successful, and then they help your communities. Whether your community is mostly people of one ethnicity or people of many different ethnicities, it's really no different. So, again, getting back to this earlier trains of thought here, it's just that, yeah, Malcolm X said it himself. He suspected that the Democratic Party, many of them, right, were just not who they said they were. Now there are Democrats who are good people, women of principle, that sort of thing, and I'm sure Malcolm X realized that as well. But yeah, I mean, yeah. Anyway, I think you guys know what I'm trying to say here with this. And getting back to my earlier train of thought, with this disparity or this difference between how people thought about race and gender and things like that before the civil rights era and afterward. It's really a pros and cons thing. There are a lot of things that people started believing that were not good after the civil rights era, and we're not talking necessarily about race or gender. We're talking mostly about sex, but I won't get into that. But I think you guys also know what I'm talking about. We're talking about marital fidelity, and look, this isn't not just me. This has been something that people in my parents' generation have frequently talked to me about, frequently, and before their generation. This is not. It's nothing new to me. It should be nothing new to you. Um, There is no reason why anybody should put themselves in a pedestal because they believe in political correctness and equality of races and genders and all that stuff. And also all the recent LGBTQ stuff. There's no reason why anybody should put themselves in a pedestal because they believe these things. And apparently people in the past didn't. No, it doesn't. No, no, no. No. It's just, look, you know, those of you who think that way need to study history a little harder. You need to stop taking, I mean, I understand that universities sometimes are a bit different now than they used to be, but you actually need to do your own reading and research regarding the character of people before the civil rights era. And even if they didn't believe what we believe now, they still believed in many things. They tended to believe many things that we ought to believe more in. And need any of you have any doubt as to what I'm talking about? All you need to do is look at the culture of my church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have not changed. We have not changed in our culture ever, ever. Um, but society definitely has. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway, leave your thoughts and comments below. Catch you guys later. Take care. Bye.